And we're going to be doing a pretty much a very shallow sweep as we normally do when we are talking about things in general. Because we are talking about them in general, we're going to try to get a general consensus on maybe some of the major world religions, what they espouse, maybe what I might think about them in comparison to what they might necessarily think about themselves. Now, I've had some interactions with most religions. I won't say that I've had interactions with all religious temples and practices. Um, but I've tried, at least my own self, to be fairly open. And I have my own version of what I would call religious precepts. So, I just clicked on something that was part of the recent news there. So, the Bible in a Year is the most popular podcast. Yeah. Well, very good. I'm sure it is. Okay, so let's talk about religion. So, what religion is a social cultural system of designated behaviors and practices, morals, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, ethics, or organizations that relates humanity to supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. So there's a supposition that those things actually exist, the supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. There's a supposition that those exist in that first sentence, but however, there is no scholarly consensus over what precisely constitutes a religion. Well, I believe that I might be able to help with that, and that is to say, the basic sentiment of what constitutes a religion. So what does constitute a religion? Well, usually there are precepts that are justified based on some kind of ideals. There are often rituals and practices which are done religiously, as it were. And in those rituals, we find maybe a sense of the higher. But I don't know if even that necessarily is needed for a religion to exist within the space of the human form. I don't know if the need to relate humanity to supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements is required. At least not in all religions. So, let's go ahead and go to what I would say is the bare bones religion. And although it is being mischaracterized, I believe, in the current century, I believe that Wiccanism is one of the most bare bones religions. And what I mean by that is that what Wiccanism truly is, when you were to read it from a philosophical standpoint, it is doing things in a I would say in a ritualistic way in order to attain certain objectives and intents. And although I believe that current Wiccanism may be more related to witchcraft and insanities that are completely outside, and maybe like what you would call maleficum, which is, the intent to do harm onto the human or the human populace, that maybe that's what's been applied to Wicca. But what I really think it is truly a very bare bones version of religions, which is ritual is required. When you do rituals over in a certain way throughout your day, that it will benefit you, and everyone, for what it's worth, in all of existence is a Wiccan. Almost everyone. All right. And what I mean by that is that everyone does, if you're wise and you're smart as you grow older, you actually do, and you develop what I would call are habitual ritualizations of ways to make yourself a functional and healthy human being. Something that I would call a Wiccan ritualization would be brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth every single morning. You brush your teeth at night. I don't, because I have issues with breathing, but you brush your teeth every morning. You take a shower every morning. You dress yourself, you feed yourself. And so when you get outside of what I would call ritualistic nature, then you're getting into maybe more of what I would call chaos. And that is outside of religion, outside of what they were trying to term as, or trying to say they can't constitute what a religion is. Well, no, it's ritualization of certain things in order to benefit you or those around you. Now, it is when we get into things like ancient, strange worships where you were sacrificing things ritualistically. Now, maybe that's not correct. But what I believe is correct is like the idea of you need to go and you want to get a strike while you're bowling. If you were to be able to have the exact same form every time when you threw your ball down the lane and got a strike, if you could create a ritual that made it so you did it over and over again, in theory, eventually you would always get a strike, is the idea. And yes, there are outside factors you can take into account. And maybe, like let's say when you're brushing your teeth, if you brush it with water that's got lead in it, then yeah, there's that outside factor, just like in the previous, example. But so I'd like to, we'll look at what they say Wiccanism is, just because and you just take what I said as what Wiccanism is. Forget all of the insanity related to pagan witchcraft. Is a modern pagan religion. No, it's not. It's not. Okay, it's not. It's not a modern religion in any sense. Scholars of religion categorize it as both a new religious movement and as part of the occultist stream of Western esotericism. And esotericism is incredibly important. But I don't believe that Wiccanism in its basest form is anything other than ritualizations of what you should do on a daily basis in order to make yourself kind of a healthy, functional person. This includes things like brushing your teeth, working out, drinking and eating water, or drinking water and eating food, These things are Wiccan even though they seem as if they're not. But if you were to go into the other space where you don't do those things, that's where chaos will occur en masse. Now, as for the idea of Wiccanism being related to pagan witchcraft, well, paganism is an incredibly old, ideal, and it's not even something we're really covering here because it is so old and so removed from what I would say is normal society now. So let's just talk for a bit about maybe, we could go into Wiccanism, but frankly, I don't really care to talk about what they would term as they should just term it witchcraft. They shouldn't term it Wiccanism, because Wiccanism is really ritualism. It's really a form of creating rituals in order to get the things that you want out of life. Now, if you're getting into the destruction of beings in order to do that, if you are sacrificing things, if you, there are Wiccan things you could do where you would sacrifice something. Composting a bunch of hay is a sacrifice that you could do every single, end of the season, and that would be, in theory, a Wiccan practice, and it would be sacrifice, so maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. But see, that's a real thing. The idea that you're cutting the neck of a rabbit or something and putting the blood on a stone or something weird in those ways, I don't think that style of ritualization does anything. Perhaps in an older world, maybe it did. Maybe there was a time even where, the ancient gods that we hear about in our texts were real, and, like the Israelites, while they were moving through the desert, actually had a light that followed them at night that showed the way so that they could continue to walk. If that's true, that's very interesting. But I would have to say that the incantations and attempts to draw out what I would call maybe demons or otherworldly beasts, interdimensional beasts, from what I would call, witchcraft instead of Wiccanism. I don't think that those things can occur in our world. Now, maybe they can. Maybe they can. But you would have to show me, with me being present, I would have to empirically see it, and I would love to, trust me, because I can't tell you how far into the abyss I have, strode to find nothing. So if you found something in the abyss, I would be incredibly impressed, because anytime I am there, I am the sole source of any kind of functional knowledge or existence. There's nothing else that I've found. So but I am a man who is generally led by my carnal and normal functional desires as a human. So it's hard for me to do some of the things that you might be required of when you're doing something like a Wiccanism, or a ritualistic thing, or something based on the Book of 50 Names. And what they say in there is that you're not supposed to masturbate for over a month or over a moon cycle. And I'm sure a lot of people can do that. I'm just actually red-blooded, and I care very much about keeping my testosterone levels up. So maybe I am not able to harness my Kundalini chi, so that I can't create empirically, things to occur from, something like the Book of 50 Names, which is old religion. That's the old God's religion. But, I would also like to see it occur in front of me when I am in the state that I'm in now. From someone else, if they were able to, go ahead. I'd be very impressed. Very impressed, but I can't believe it. I've never seen it. I've never been able to do anything with it myself, and I've never seen anything outside of me. So I'd love to see it if it was real. But when I say that, I imagine that there was a time when these truths and these rituals might have done something of value. But just like there is no more God that was following the Hebrews during their Exodus, I don't believe that those beings still are active in our world, if they ever truly were. And in the Bible, you might say that they were. So, I think we're going to move on real quickly to Christianity. And so, Christianity is a kind of interesting doctrine. I feel as if it houses a lot of the older religions, a lot of the Babylonian religions. It houses a lot of the Egyptian-style religions in the idea of the Christ. I feel as if most of what was written in the New Testament, and especially when it comes to prophecy and end of world remarks, is mostly a fabrication. And what I mean by a fabrication, I don't mean it's divine. It may be that it's very well thought out and very intelligible, and maybe even had a source that was once divine, but that through time there has been a lot of dissemination of what I would call the true source material, which is probably the Gnostic texts and some of the other texts that come from, the ancient civilizations, which are much too old for us to even recall or really understand them anymore. We have also what I would say is a receding understanding of history. And that is to say that at this point now, we may seem as if we are the most advanced that we've ever been. But in fact, we have such a lack of knowledge from a previous time that we actually are the most unaware that we've ever been in comparison to past civilizations. And what I mean by that is that past civilizations at their height were more aware of what was happening in the past civilizations at their height than we now have as information. And so Christianity, is probably one of the better religions because it does not require of you to enforce it onto others. It's a very important thing. And a lot of religions actually do that. Very few are the forceful, and I'm talking about Islam, you must submit to our religion and its insanity in my eyes. Mostly because as what I would say more of a Gnostic person or someone who tries to gain the knowledge of the infinite through the knowledge of self, I believe that you shouldn't try to make someone submit to said knowledge. There's no point. They don't deserve to be forced to submit. They don't deserve to be given no choice in the matter of whether or not they want to be an ascended being or be a more generally simple human. That's not fair to them to force it, and you're not going to get the result you want. At least not over the long term. Now, let's talk about, what they would call Christianity and, the basic definition. And Christianity is an Abrahamic monotheistic religion based on life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Its adherents, known as Christians, believe that Jesus is the Christ, whose coming as the Messiah was prophesied in the Hebrew Bible, called the Old Testament in Christianity, and chronicled in the New Testament. Now, there's also a few things wrong with Christianity as well. We've got things like the Council of Nicaea, which greatly reduced the number of books that were in the Bible or in the accepted Bible, removing some very key figures and some very important ideas, including Enoch and the Mother Mary and some other very important ideals related to Mary Magdalene even. So, and there are other problems with Christianity. And that is, in maybe it is so made into these different sects that it is hard to have a cohesive and a coherent religion in some senses. There was something I was thinking of that I've kind of lost. And it was, what was it related to? Well, I'll get back to that, but let me for a moment, talk about the Book of Revelations. And it's in the Book of Revelations that I think you can see the fingerprints of a corrupt system. And what I mean by that is that there is very few religions that would be as kind and gracious as Christianity intends from its views, while at the same time impregnating its own text with these ideals and revelations of the end of times, trying to, and while being very vague and very strange about it. And so what people can then do is they can take that text and they can mold and shape it into any form that they want. And what I mean by that is, in the book of Revelations, we have such things as there's going to be a massive red state from the east that is a problem for Western religions, and it's going to be the fight between that and the Western religions that's a problem. And so initially that was thought to be Russia. We applied all of that to Russia. They're the red communist state, and now people can apply it to China if they want to. And in some time, maybe they'll be able to apply it to India if they want to. It's insane how you can just jump these things. Now, for what it's worth, they talk about the dragon with the 14 crowns and the 7 heads and all of these things, and they say all of these different, numbers. And, I even can go and extrapolate that to what they're maybe trying to do with the COVID, or the coronavirus, because it's, a monster with so many heads and so many crowns on those heads, And so, you can easily say that they are just trying to adopt and create what they've written down in this religion, even though it's completely what I would call a maleficium, which is, the against humans. It is, again, the Wiccan problem, which is why people were against witches, is not because they would suckle imps, and not because they would, do wild orgies with demons in the forest. No one cared about that. It's because they would do harm to other humans. That's what made it so that they were a problem. And I feel like, the book of Revelations holds that tone. And if you were to read, and there's things in there that talk about how there's a great man that's going to go, or a great person even. They don't even have to, this could be Kamala Harris, it could be Biden, it doesn't matter to them. But they know it's not Trump, and you know why? Because this great man has a head injury, and then 18 months into his, his tenure, he flips on the people and everything goes to hell. And that's when he starts he's the Antichrist. He starts the revolution that, makes the end of the world occur, basically. So, imagine, though, as, these crazy Christians, you might be like, yeah, let's get Trump in, and then after 18 months, they know it's not him because he hasn't had the brain injury and blah, blah, blah. And so they're, they just switch over. And what's strange, though, is that was written down by a person. I don't believe it was written down by a divine creature. And what I mean by that is that I think that maybe, the Bible might have been written down by something in a more divine sense. Maybe there was a time where there were beings like what they would call Yahweh in the Judaism, or Jehovah, or Hashem. And not Jehovah. It's either Yahweh or Hashem. And there are 70 more names of God, I think, and Jehovah may be one of them. But those beings may have been real. Moloch Baal may have been a real entity that you could actually summon and make do things for you if you were to sacrifice children. That's literally a potential, I think, thousands of years ago. But I think in this time now, I find it hard to believe because I have not seen it. I haven't seen someone be able to call to Hashem. Now, okay, there was that one man who, was doing, he said that he had the ability to call down these, I don't know, I guess UFOs from the sky. And, so then they had the news guy came, and he's like, I don't know if he said Hashem or if he was using Yahweh. I think he said Yahweh. Because these are different God entities in some sense. It's like a fractal almost. So he said, Yahweh, prove to these people that I'm not crazy, bring this. And sure enough, there are, a couple of UFO things that come down so that you can see them. And I mean, the news reporter calls his fucking boss and he's like, hey, this guy actually had fucking things come down. And, so perhaps maybe there is still the possibility of accessing these entities, and it's just much more difficult. And so you need things like, the cremation of care in the Bohemian Grove to try and access Moloch Baal. And they definitely are sacrificing children if they actually are accessing him. See, that's the thing that's so disturbing about it. That if you are actually accessing these higher godheads, that you are probably doing something very, very wrong. But then again, you can see from the Yahweh, example where this black man literally calls down these, UFO things. They're only in the sky. It's not like they come down and sit and then, God talks to everybody, but it was very impressive. So, that's my basic overview of Christianity, I feel like. And there are a lot of good lessons within the Christian doctrine, and that is because I believe they were taken from older religions and used to, and like I believe maybe even the Book of Revelations might be a badly translated prophecy of Thoth. It's possible. It doesn't seem like it's like a correct translation in any sense. But, and I really think it does hold some level of maleficium, because if you say that death is coming with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, including plague and, no, that's not, that's like the intent of maleficium. It's the intent behind it. You are trying to create a revelation, an end to a means, and you're doing it through almost exclusively destruction. And it doesn't seem as if it's all supposed to be a one-for-one and actual parable. It seems as if they're trying to say, it's a parable, but at the same time, it's a parable talking about actual destruction. It's not talking about like a false form of it. So, let's go on to Judaism, which Judaism, I think, is one of the, it's an interesting religion. I am Jewish by blood. That is, my father is Jewish, but my mother is not, so I am technically not Jewish by the standards which Judaism had held for a great many years, but which no longer makes sense because the number of rapes that occur on Jewish women is no longer nearly as high. So you're not having women who have been raped not knowing whether or not their child is from the father or from some random man, and that making it so that they could only justify that you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish. So if your mother was Jewish, then you're Jewish no matter what, and you're raised Jewish. But, the ideal is that if your father was Jewish and the mother wasn't Jewish, somehow you're not Jewish, even though your Y gene is obviously from a Jewish descent. But is it? I don't know. In theory, if someone that wasn't Jewish married someone that was Jewish, and they had a girl, those two X chromosomes could, in the next few generations, the one that was the Jewish X chromosome could be relegated out of the gene pool, as it were. But, there were still, during the making of, chromosomes, there would still be interactions and changes, so there would be differences in the one gene through, some of the random things that occur when you are recreating, genes and making a new human, as it were. So that's that's an interesting little caveat, though, that Judaism, you aren't Jewish if your father's Jewish. You're only Jewish if your mother's Jewish. It's a very, very odd thing, and it's related to the fact that there were a lot of rapes in the old world. And so they couldn't always justify, or at least that's when I did research into it a great many years ago. That seemed to be the intent behind it. So, also Judaism is, a very odd religion in some ways because it purports that somehow the Jewish people are some kind of chosen people of God, which is almost the same ideal that Islam has when they say that everyone must submit because it's the true religion. It's a very scary thing when you start to do that, when you say, oh, well, it's the true religion, or it's the religion that, we're chosen people. And those chosen people may, based on what I said about genetics, they may not be even the chosen people anymore. Who the hell knows how it all would work out? Not to mention that there's only supposed to be like 1,400 of them, or some incredibly small number of actual chosen people of the tribe of Judah, So, but see, this goes back to a point I was making before, which is, were these tribe of Judah actually being cared for by a real entity named Yahweh that was following them through the desert with, a light to help them light the way when they were on their exodus? Did he really rain frogs down, and kill all the firstborn? Or was that just, a Jewish assassin? How did it actually work? And we don't know, unfortunately. But, in Judaism and in the Old Testament, you can find what I would say is some of the best instances of historical contextual, like relative history. It may not always be completely correct. It may not always be, it may be in a parable, or it may mean something else. But there's something being said, and if you could decipher it all, it would be very valuable, at least to a historian and a scholar, and perhaps to, philosophers and people who cared about politics. Because it has so many stories of political, strife, of wars, of, interactions between people, and what happens when you have these interactions occur in, things like David and Bathsheba, and how he was like cursed as a king because he went and he took this woman, who was, married, and the King Solomon, who literally, the Jewish star, which is a hex symbol, I don't know if he made that at the time or how that worked out, but he literally was using the hex symbol and a whole series of strange rituals to call out demons and all these things, if you look into the Book of Solomon. So there is some very odd and interesting things in Judaism that is absolutely worth the read. Things like talking about the Ark of the Covenant. So my name's Samuel. In the Book of Samuel, they talk about the Ark of the Covenant. So this was a massive golden box. And inside the golden box were 5, statues that were finer. I can't recall what they were. And then 5, like, rats statues. These were all gold. And so they took these things out of the box and they distributed them to the random, these not random, I suppose, but this collection of cities, that were the conquerors of the Jewish at the time, who had taken the Ark of the Covenant, from the Jews when they, in some kind of conquest. But they had taken all of these implements out of the box and spread them to these 5 major cities and these 5 minor cities. The 5 mice, and the 5, I can't recall what the other implementation was that was inside of there, but it was some kind of an animal figure. So they take them, they bring them to the cities, And in a short time, everyone starts dying of some kind of horrible plague. And, so naturally, they all say, all right, well, fucking pack all these things up and get them back into the box and give it back to the Jews. We don't fucking want this Ark of the Covenant, And what, you might be able to say from what we understand about current maybe nuclear theory is that there might have been some kind of nuclear or radiation occurring from these items, and that was what was occurring or killing people in such massive numbers within these cities and in whatever area it was that, these things were being sent to. Mostly just as treasure, but they don't know what they're playing with, and so that's an interesting story in the book of Samuel about the Ark of the Covenant being basically taken and given back because they are like, yeah, we don't know what this is, and it's killing all of us, so here, you can have it back. A very, very strange story. And there are a great many of those, including the Book of Solomon, which talks about him, interacting with a great many demons or a great many spirits, genii, whatever we would call them. So, Islam. And we didn't even read Judaism. Judaism, ethnic, cultural, comprising the collective religious, cultural, and legal tradition and civilization of the Jewish people. Judaism is considered by religious Jews to be the expression of the covenant that God established with the children of Israel. You know what's the symbol of the covenant between God and the children of Israel? It's the rainbow. It was after, I think, the flood or something that the rainbow came out, and it was a showing to Noah that the covenant between God and man was to be held sacred after that point, something along those lines. But all the same, it's the rainbow, and it's very strange how it's co-opted and used in so many different things for so many different purposes. And they don't recognize that it's the covenant between God and man. Like the gay lobby just has adopted the rainbow. But it doesn't seem to be, if they knew about it, it's almost kind of like occultism. It's like taking it and using it for your own use. But there's no way you'd have to, I guess, invert the colors. Because that's how you actually make occult things, is that you invert them. The swastika is an inversion of, of the ancient swastika, which was, it's just literally, imagine your hand like this, and then imagine your hand like this. That's what the swastika is, and it has to do with the way that the angles are like this, or are they like this? I don't know if you can tell what I'm trying to do with my finger, but in essence, it actually changes the sign into something which is evil. That's why, it's at the very least occult. And, it depends on what you're changing. If it's a good thing, then you'll change it into something evil, I suppose. By just doing the inverse of it, and that's the same and that's why maybe the hex symbol is so strange, because there is no true inverse of it. If you inverse it, it's the same thing. I don't know, maybe I'm going to have to go look at that a little bit more and decide whether that's true. And you can even see in the menorah that it seems almost like it's a rainbow. Again, showing of the covenant between the God and the children of Israel. So, there's... I will say one last thing about Judaism, and that is to talk about Israel. Israel is not Judaism. Israel is a nation, and to equate the two is a false narrative. You can say great things about Judaism and terrible things about Israel and be completely intellectually honest. And, I'll leave it there so that it doesn't get too disturbed. But, there's things about the state of Israel where they bombed, I don't remember what was the the ship, but there was a USS something, and they literally tried to bomb it and destroy it, then blame Pakistan so that we would get into a war with Pakistan. And if it wasn't for the fact that the sailors were able to get a message off to Americans to let them know that Israel had been bombing the ship, we never would have known. We never would have known that it was Israel that actually did it in an effort to try to make us be in a war with Pakistan. And that was in the 70s. And, you know, I have a hard time forgiving nations. I do. You know, it's the same thing as, you know, I can understand why Fidel Castro, who I believe was the, you know, person who helped to kill JFK, you know, probably did it. Because, I mean, they literally tried to kill him 1,000 ways. And it was after the assassination of JFK that we put into doctrine that we were no longer going to attempt to assassinate a foreign leader of any country. And I believe that was in response to the fact that the Cuban government had successfully killed JFK versus the opposite, where, you know, the CIA failed to kill Fidel Castro, even though they tried a great many times. So, you know, I would... yeah, I would say there's something that had to do with what I was talking about Judaism. Anyway, Islam. One of the more recent religions, and what I find to be one of the more foolish religions. And that is because it is one of the most recent. I find any of the recent religions to be very foolish, including Mormons, because although they're very great people, nice people, very kind, very generous people, lacking in many ways, though, as well. Or I would say so from my personal level of experience. But they have like images of Joseph Smith up there, and we all know some of the most ridiculous of the stories related to him. And it's also a form of idolatry if you are a Christian to put up the image of another creature, you know, besides what you would call the Christ, I suppose. Or if you wanted to, you know, envision a picture of maybe Hashem or Yahweh, maybe those things could be deified, or you could... they're kind of like a golden calf. It all is kind of idolatry. But I feel like Islam, you know, it was made, you know, it says the 7th century. It was made by a man who was incredibly flawed and had incredible issues, and people believe that he was not. And it was made in a place that is incredibly tough and without much kindness or care or ability to be such. You know, I'm imagining these Middle Eastern desert scenarios that can be very, very unforgiving. And, you know, it holds kind of an odd place in the heart of a Christian. And I am a Christian in many senses. I'm a Romanian, and it was in, you know, Wallachia where Vlad the Impaler set up the forest of dead Muslim bodies, you know, after he had soundly defeated them in a war, well, not in the war, but in a battle. So he defeated this large Muslim army. And he knew that a very, 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 very large Muslim army, huge, the hordes were coming later after this attack. So he decided, you know, which was probably a very difficult thing to do as a Christian man, even though I think he did this under the course of, you know, many years, and as a person probably grew accustomed to it in order to keep law and order. But he decided to, you know, and he was impaling a lot of people throughout this time, including courtiers and things that would come and remark on the stench, apparently, that he would, say, well, I'll impale you higher than everybody else. You don't have to smell them, basically, is at least the worst story about Vlad the Impaler. But here he is on this battlefield with all of these dead and dying soldiers, and he commands his army to impale at least 35,000 of them, I think was the number. And by impale, I mean put them up on a large stake. Usually, I believe it would be through their asshole or some other orifice, or maybe because there's so many were dead, they were just being tossed up in weird ways. Who knows? Usually, I think when you impale someone, you put it into their literal asshole, and it's a very awful thing, and a very horrible death. But I'm sure it was a great way to restrict people from being unlawful in a place that was probably incredibly difficult to hold lawful order because of things like the Muslims constantly invading and living there and having completely different religious forms and forms of culture. But so he gets his army to assemble this forest of dead Muslim bodies. Turkish horde, as it were, at the time. And when the Muslim hordes come, they are so aghast by the sight of their fellow men impaled in this massive forest of bodies that they literally turn around. They say, okay, well, you know what? Because what was happening at the time was Vlad the Impaler's brother was being used by the Muslim hordes, and they were going to create an insurrection in Wallachia and hopefully then take over Hungary as well. And so Hungary at the time had actually imprisoned Vlad the Impaler. They let him out to let him go and do this, basically, and be the fucking soldier, man, that, will stop the Muslim hordes. And, so after, they turn around, his brother is still there with the hordes, and he takes a small force into Wallachia, but not what was going to be the hordes of Muslims. And I don't know if it was all soldiers or how it was being worked out, but I mean, imagine if you do come and you say, hey, all right, so all of you citizens, are coming as well. We're literally hoarding this area. We're going to go and we're going to just take it over. We got too many people in our town. 100,000 people are all going up there. And then, I can imagine if they were just citizens instead of warriors, they'd be like, you want us to live here where they've made a forest of our dead bodies? Like, no, we're just going to turn around. I can imagine maybe that's how that worked out. So, as a Christian, like I said, it's difficult for me to justify the religion of Islam very easily in any way. I actually am against, the wearing of masks because they have been calling them face coverings as well, and that is, in essence, the doctrine of Sharia law. I know that's a very large leap, but when you are from a genetic line that can kind of feel and remember those moments where you literally, had the Muslim hordes, coming and knocking down the door, and you stop them, and, you don't want that. You don't want their world. You don't want the way that they exist and the way that their religion, portrays onto humans to be the way that you exist. It doesn't become as far a leap to say when someone says you have to use a face covering in public, for health reasons. I can say, well, I refuse to do it for religious reasons. But, it's, I don't know, I know, Islam has been hardly, or highly criticized, and I do know that there are good reasons for it. I know that the extremists that are in the religion are a much higher percentage than there are in any other religion. And when you talk about the numbers of people that there are in the religion, and you say that there might be up to 3% of extremists, and that those extremists are not, unactive in their form, that they may be active and very violent, it creates probably a great series of Arabic ethno-states that are very dangerous for anyone who is in a disagreement. And one of the reasons why I think Islam, being a forced submission style of religion, is one of the worst. But we're going to move on, as we are shallowly just combing the waters here. You know what I'd like to do, real quick, before we go to Buddhism, because it's kind of re-enlightening in me, is that I just want to go to, everything that we've looked at so far and just look at images. Excuse me. So when we say religion, these are kind of some of the images that they'll pull up for us. Some beautiful cathedrals, a bunch of the signs of different religions. And I don't have Taoism on here, no, I don't. Which is kind of the idea of duality. But okay, and then let's go to Wiccanism and see what kind of images they show for that. It's very, very childish in comparison to what I had explained Wiccanism to be, which is ritualistic. They're showing what I would call is Satanism, which is not even correct because it's not Satanism, because Satanism is a very, very distinct form of religion. And what I mean by that is that Satanism is actually like Gnosticism, in that Satan's main problem when he was discussing with God how he had been created was his misunderstanding and unrealization of how he had been created. Because God said, I created you, and he said, no, I created me, and he couldn't prove to God that he had created him, and so that was like the downfall moment where God essentially got the higher ground. Because they were equal in all things except for God could tell him how he had been created, whereas Satan could not. And so that is what Satanism is the ideal of trying to make up what you believe to be right. But unlike Gnosticism, it doesn't do it from your individual self. It's almost doing it from, or from maybe Gnosticism sometimes will say from a secondary source or from, a higher power source. But when you're doing what I would call pure Satanism, you are going from self only, and you're not analyzing it from a place of, a higher philosophy almost. So that when you are asked, how did you come to exist then by God, you can't answer. Whereas maybe a Gnostic could say, well, I always existed, I'm eternal, and that's how I come to exist now. So, there's no... And that is actually the truth. When you talk about infinite space, infinite reality, infinite time-space makes it so that there could be infinite numbers of realities that are the exact same. And so at some point you're going to be living in the exact same body and world in the exact same time frame, with everything being the exact same, and you will be living out the exact same life. Therefore, you are eternal. Therefore, if God had asked Satan and Satan had said, well, I've always existed, that is how, I created myself, is because there has never been a chance for me not to be in a created state. And yeah, it kind of gets very cryptic and strange, but that is the real answer to how eternality works and how you would, as a being, answer that question to God. So, images for Christianity real quick. Looks like we're going to see a lot of crosses. And the sacrificed form, which I really actually dislike. My version of Christianity is kind of like the end of Clockwork Orange, where he's got all his mojo back and he's ready to go kill everybody for fucking up his shit. See, I want him to come out of the cave and be like, all right, now let's get an army together and let's kill everybody. I'm fine with that if he wants to sacrifice himself and then he's going to actually, In theory, they might have had a sop, the thing that they put on your mouth while you're being crucified. It might have been filled with morphine, and that's how he didn't die or something. There might have been a way so they kept him alive, so he was really alive, and then they moved him to Ethiopia. That's possible, too, something. But I would have liked if Jesus had been like, all right, so you crucified me, now I'm going to get a huge army together, I'm going to kill everybody. And I really wish, for what it's worth, at the end of Clockwork Orange, they showed him going and getting back at everybody who had done him wrong. Instead of him just smiling and then, the scene of him, I don't know if I guess he's basically raping the woman. The woman's on top of him. It's very strange. With all of the Victorians clapping. Such a fun scene. And by fun, I mean funny. But okay, so, that's what we're going to see when we see Christianity. All right, let's take a look at some images for Judaism. Lot of the hex. A lot of the hex symbol. The symbol of David, symbol of Solomon, or the key to Solomon. Some images of the menorah. No images of a rainbow. That's kind of weird. I guess the menorah is kind of the rainbow. I guess. Isn't that strange? Isn't that strange? The covenant between God. Oh, at least this one. Seeing a rainbow messianic symbol. I'm not sure what that's doing in there with the cross. I don't think that's right. I think you put a pentagram inside of there. Yeah, it's a pentagram. Womp, 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 womp. Yeah, it's a pentagram. You don't. It's not a hex. Well, there's some kind of pentagram that you're able to put in there. I can't. Or is that the 7-sided that goes in the 6? I don't know. It's been a while since I've done these kind of calculations. So, let's see here. We'll move on. It's kind of the images. All right, some of the images that are related to Islam. Now, this is interesting that the Star and Crescent, which is a kind of a beautiful form that we do see in the sky, is something that has been kind of co-opted by Islam. I can't recall what the Star and Crescent was used for before Islam, but I can't imagine that they took it from an esoteric place in 700, AD. No, I don't believe that. So some interesting things that we do see when we're looking at some of the images of Islam. A lot of black and whites here. Had some very, very disturbing iconography in, some ways. The black cube of Saturn, which is what this big, cube is a representation of. Very, very disturbing that they don't know that they're all worshiping Saturn. Or maybe they do. Maybe they know they're worshiping Cronus and time, and, that's why they're walking around it, like, seconds or hours in a day. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing with a black cube of Saturn. Very disturbing stuff. All right. Very pretty buildings, though. They're not bad at making buildings. They're very pretty. The thing is, though, I believe that all of these towers used to actually be true conveyors of energy. Not, like in a mythical sense. That, we used to have actual pillars that would convey energy and monoliths, and I don't know if those things actually exist still, or if the energy that we were conveying and using or needing them to convey is in fact just not active in the world right now, which may be the same reason that some of the higher gods are not able to be active, if they were in fact real in the time that these religious books were written. Or were these people like Moses just, the burning bush was actually a psychedelic, and he was eating, gypsum weed, and, so he was seeing things, and, God was talking to him, but it was really himself, It's a lot. It's all very difficult to understand. All right. So Buddhism. Buddhism is the world's 4th largest religion with over 520 million followers, 7% of the global population, which are known as Buddhists. Buddhism encompasses a variety of traditions, beliefs, and spiritual practices largely based on original teachings attributed to the Buddha and resulted interpreted philosophies. All right, so I'm going to talk about one of the interesting stories that I remember reading about the Buddha. And there was a certain Buddha who had just died. And I don't really know the context of the story or the meaning behind it, but during his funeral there was some kind of it was like a row about who was to be the next Buddha. So this fight was occurring, or argument was occurring, about who should be the next Buddha. And they were saying that maybe, this Buddha was the last Buddha. He's so great that there could be no other Buddha. Something along those lines. And as they argued, the body of the Buddha, shifted somehow, and his feet broke through the coffin's bottom so that they were exposed. And that was like a relativity of the fact that, it is the teachings and the path of the Buddha which will reveal, which makes it so that there will be another Buddha, kind of a thing. It was a very strange, kind of a cryptic thing, and I feel like Buddhism maybe in many ways is very, very cryptic. I mean, the idea of a man sitting underneath a tree for 25 years, the idea that, the Buddha that's the big fat Buddha where it's all in a state of perfect happiness and bliss, like a fat child almost. It's difficult. It's a difficult one, I think. So, Buddhism is a very, very complex religion because there are so very many gods within it. And that's also, well, no, I'm sorry. I may be just thinking of Hinduism in general, being very simple, very stupid. It's Hinduism that has the infinite number of gods. Buddhism has some of the same ideals, I think, and they have a great number of forms of gods. I mean, is Ganesh, is that all Hindi? Or is Ganesh Buddhist? I don't know. I feel kind of very stupid, and that's why I kind of moved to, the Wikipedia article, because Buddhism is not something that I personally practice aside from on a, relatively understandable basis. The thing is that when I would read things from the Dalai Lama or things from, Buddhist writings in general, I would say, duh. I would say, no fucking duh. Yeah, you're supposed to do this and this and that's this. No fucking duh. So I never really, I feel like I'm already enlightened enough to be past what teachings they might want to impart upon you. And there are some really great teachings, and but when I read them, I kind of say, duh. We can even go to the Four Noble Truths. We crave and cling to impermanent states and things. Yeah. That is because we are, it's all, it feels as if it's all very obvious. If you've read maybe the Two Treatises of Government by John Locke, it's all very obvious. But see, and there are things about Buddhism which I completely disagree with. They believe in, reincarnation and rebirth. I don't believe that you, the being that you are, ever reincarnates or goes through a rebirthing cycle. I don't believe that is rational. I believe that maybe some portion of what you might call your relative self might be able to be excised from your form during some portion of time and space, and that relative self might have some kind of reincarnation, but that relative self is not actually you, because you are actually living the life of your form, your human form now. So I do have some problems with the idea of reincarnation. I also have some problems with some of the Buddhist ideals behind you are going to be reincarnated as the thing which you harmed, maybe. There's this old Buddhist image of a man, or of a man with an axe, and on the man's body is a pig's head, and he's got the axe and he's lowering it down onto a pig who's got a man's head. And although I can understand that on some levels, the ideal that you're not seeing behind that moment where the pig has his head cleaved off in order for the man to eat it are the moments where that pig was born, the moments where that farmer helped the pig, with getting him a bunch of food, getting him water, he pet the pig. You don't see any of those moments. So you imagine somehow that there's only the evil moment of you killing the pig, and there's not the moment of you making it so that same pig has progeny that continues onward almost endlessly, and you're literally the bringer of life to it and its, progeny. It doesn't, you're not really thinking about, okay, so there are great things about Buddhism, but it's interpreted badly by those who wish to try to use karma and karmic balance to justify their means. We're all supposed to be vegetarians because if you kill an animal, you're more likely to be that, or even if you eat the animal, you're more likely to be that animal. It's madness. Because, what are they saying? What, they're going to rebirth into being a plant? And then what? Am I going to come by as a goat and just chew them up? Come on, let's think this through here. So, I believe, and, they say, no, instead of going down to something lower like a plant, because that's what I've added into my body all my life, I'm going to ascend higher into another form of a human, or a better human. I don't know. I have some problems with Buddhism. I find some of the talk about chakras very interesting, including trying to envision your chakras like a disc, maybe almost like a compact disc, but a much thicker one. It's whirling in some kind of incredibly fast and expressive, motion, and I like some of those things. Like if your back hurts, you can kind of envision, that chakra down there, and try to energize it in some kind of form. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So, yeah, and for what it's worth, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path is a completely justifiable and intelligent form of thought and action. And you can go read of those and do that on your own time, but it's fine. And the thing is, though, it's just like I know that I've gotten those truths from my experiences in life. I know those things, but it doesn't necessarily always equate. So, let's say I had a pig and I felt really bad because I had to kill him, right? I didn't kill him, someone else did. But, I felt terrible because he had a leg that was really, really hurt. And, for most of his life he was doing fine, but then his leg was so hurt I had to pick him up every day to eat his food. It was coming to winter. He was going to freeze to death outside, potentially. So where is the better, let's say I have to live my life as that pig. I wouldn't have wanted to live that winter outside in the fucking snow and cold with me having to create these fake houses for him so he didn't get wet on him, and no, I wouldn't have wanted to be that pig. So, and I'm sorry that it took 2 shots to kill him. I'm sorry that happened too. feel real bad about it. I'd prefer he have died, with just a instant just click and then he's just gone, but um I think I would, I would prefer the way that I did it versus, having done it potentially even worse and letting him get into a state of discord past, something I could help him with. And imagine me being terribly sick on a day or something when it's winter, and then I have to go out and I have to make sure that he's covered. Then I have to make sure that he's warm. Then I have to pick him up so that he can eat, and I have to bring water out to him. And I have to make sure now that I've got, these huge snowpacks, completely removed. It would, I mean, if he were me, he would say, yeah, it's probably a great time to kill me. See, that's just it. That's the thing that people aren't seeing about the karma. That's what they are not getting when they're talking about you shouldn't kill animals because of Buddhist intent, But let's move on. Hinduism is, I believe what the Bhagavad Gita is, based around, or they base Hinduism around the Bhagavad Gita. And there are a great, great many gods in Hinduism. And it's got 1.25 billion followers. So, that's why when the Muslims were causing so many issues in India, the Hindus were like, no, we are way more people than you. We're just going to fucking kill you. And maybe that's not a good thing. I don't think it is. But hey, it's how they did. They're like, fuck you. You're going to play with our religion. You're going to be this crazy. We're just going to go kill you en masse. And, hell, looking at the Romanians, or the Wallachians at the time, I it's hard to blame them, but I don't know. I think there were a lot of weird slaughters happening in Hindu at the time. I don't know enough about it. Or in India. So, as for what I know about Hinduism, I can talk about, Kali, blood for, breakfast, blood for, lunch, blood for dinner, That's Kali for you. They have a lot of very interesting gods. Some of the more, popular are the ones that, are usually related to power, like Kali. But there are ones like Lakshmi, which are, much more gracious and kind in their administrations with humans, or in what their expectations are out of humans, I suppose. Hinduism is so very complex that you would really need to go and look into it yourself and you need to go look into individual gods, I suppose, in order to, get a good sense of what it was that they were trying to convey. But that's the same for all of these religions. Yeah, and this is funny as they define this, because, Hindus are not forced to be monotheistic. They could be monotheistic if they want, but they could be polytheistic. They could be, they could have a whole list of gods. And, it's interesting because it kind of reminds me of the way that the Greeks would have the Lars and the Penates in their shrines. And so they would have these symbols and images to protect their house. And, and sometimes, and they would have images of, like, the genius of the house, which was, usually a man in a toga with a raised, his hand raised with a drinking cup with in the act of pouring, a libation is how it's described. Or it was a serpent. A serpent would sometimes be on the wall of the shrine as the genius of the house. And those were, and then they would have, gods as the Lars and the Penates around, the shrine, depending on, who it was that they worshipped. And that's kind of sounds very much like the Hindus. I remember also once when I was doing some work installing a antenna for Wi-Fi connections within a 7-Eleven. This 7-Eleven had probably an Indian owner, and because there were literally only Indians working there, and I don't know if they were working for minimum wage or even less, or how it was working out. God, who knows? But I do remember when I was back in their break room area, because that's where they had their computers. They had and they were still very religious. They had the images of I'm not sure who it was. Who was the blue babe, huh? Is that Kali? I don't know if it is. It's Vishnu. So they had images of Vishnu up, and you could see the bits of wet bread that they had put on the face of this image of Vishnu. And this was a calendar, like a monthly calendar. So, I mean, it doesn't matter the image, or how unsacred the thing is. They still needed to go and feed the image of their god, and that's something you do with the Lars and Penates as well in Greek culture, is you would make sure to go and give them food during meal times. You have to go and bring, the gods of your house hold food. It's very interesting, a very interesting and old form. So, I would say if you want to delve into Hinduism, you really need to go and look at individual gods. You've got Vishnu, you've got Shiva. I think Shiva might be the blue babe, huh? You've got Smartism, 5 deities treated as same. Shaktism, Devi. I don't know. See, I don't know any of them. I do know Lakshmi, though. I was taught Lakshmi by this woman in a nurse in the hospital. So let me go, and just as a point of interest, we'll go to images real quick. Yeah. So there's one of the blues. I don't know if that's the blue babe, or I think that there's a blue babe. It's not just a blue guy. No, I think Vishnu might just be the blue guy, huh? You got Ganesh there. Oh no, Shiva. Shiva is blue as well. I'm not who. So, reason why I did all this was mostly just so that I could go and type in Lakshmi. Lakshmi. And, so Lakshmi is one of, if you were to go into Hinduism and you wanted a good starting god, or goddess, I suppose, in this context, Lakshmi is a good one. I can recommend her mostly because I can trust the words and intents of, this woman that told me it. And I trust her, because when you talk about, Hinduism, you can talk very quickly about things like Kali, and you can talk about, and you can see how someone will respond to Kali. And when they respond to Kali with a very, very negative intonation, usually they're a pretty good person, and they'll be able to direct you in ways that are not necessarily, I would say maybe chaotic and evil, which I would call maybe the form of Kali. So, let's move on to Sikhism. Now, Sikhism is a less known religion. It's Punjabi. And, it's a monotheistic, originated in Punjab region around the 15th century. So, again, not a great religion in my mind because it is so young. I do not like young religions. I would prefer them be very old. I prefer them be so old that we can't even define where they came from, kind of like, the way we look at the Bible. Maybe the way we look at some of the symbols in, like, the book of the 50 names. Trying to decipher why it is that these utterances were the utterances that were so used by people that were so very ancient to us now. So let's go and get a little bit of a basic idea of Sikhism. All right, so it's a monotheist religion. Punjab, 15th. Sikhism is one of the youngest major religions and the world's 5th largest. About 25 million Sikhs. Not a great many, but it's a great many if they were all in one place. However, there are additionally roughly 150 million more Nanak, Nam, Lewis people across the world who also believe in 10 Sikh gurus and Guru Granth Sahib. So obviously those names were probably the Buddhas of their time. Yeah, Guru Nanak over there appears to be the founder of Sikhism and the first of 10 Sikh gurus. All right, so Sikh scripture opens with the Mui Mantar, fundamental prayer about Ikonor, one God. The core beliefs of Sikhism, articulated in the Guru Granth Sahib, include faith and meditation on the name of the one Creator. Divine unity and equality of all humankind, engaging in seva, selfless service, striving for justice for the benefit and prosperity of all, and honest conduct and livelihood while living a householder's life. Following the standard, Sikhism rejects claims that any particular religious tradition has a monopoly on absolute truth. So, we will say this about Sikhism. It seems to be very, very generous. It doesn't seem to be a religion like maybe Islam that's like, no, this is the religion or else you die. So I would say that maybe if you might want to go and get a little bit more knowledge on Sikhism, go for it, Probably wouldn't do you any harm. Doesn't seem like it would. It gained converts for both Hinduism and Islam. Mughal rulers of India tortured and executed 2 of the Sikh gurus after they refused to convert to Islam. The persecution of Sikhs triggers the founding of the Kaisa by Guru Gobind. And so, just as a point of interest, again, why maybe Islam is kind of a difficult religion to justify. In 1500 and 1600, these are not wars. These are not soldiers. This is not the same thing as what I said happened in Wallachia with the, bodies being impaled in mass. These are 2 gurus that were probably just religious teachers that were changing people from Islam, and they killed them because they didn't convert to Islam. I don't know. Something about that just sounds wrong. Everything about it sounds wrong. All right. Persecution of Sikhs triggered the founding of Kaisa in order to protect the freedom and conscience of religion, of conscience and religion. Okay. With members expressing the qualities of a Saint Sapani, a saint soldier. Well, that's good. If there's one thing that you should add to any religion, it's Mars. Every single religion and person under the sun could benefit from, and maybe it's Athena more than Mars, could benefit from a warlike atmosphere which determines that people justify themselves in the state of nature. So, let's move on, though, but let's go real quick to Sikhism, and let's just go take a look at some of the images that they present. Okay. Okay. Looks like you just, okay. Not sure what this says about the religion. Some images of some buildings. Okay. See, it's, I will say that it seems like of some of the religions we've looked at, it seems to have a very a good head on its shoulders when it comes to enforcement and submission to the religion, having literally none. Okay, so we're going to talk about occultism for a minute here. And occultism, interestingly enough, let's go over back to Wiccanism real quick. You can see how I don't agree with how they view Wiccanism, because it's basically occultism. Well, guess what? Those 2 things are not the same. They're not even close to the same. As a Wiccan, you do not necessarily always change and invert the symbols of something. That is not how it always works. That's not the reason why things, function within a Wiccan form. Wiccans are ritualistic. They're not necessarily occultic. And, you can see some of the exact same images of cultism from one to the other. So, I don't know. I don't like the way that people try to view Wiccanism. They might as well call it occultism. That would probably be a better version, or at least call it just witchcraft. The craft of witches, not Wiccanism, because those are separate things. Okay, so talking about occultism. What is occultism? Well, we can see a little bit from maybe this image here. At the very least, they show what occultism is in reference to these stars. One star, normal. The second star, inverted. So, what is that do to a symbol when you invert it? Oh, and here's a 666 symbol here. I don't know if you... And this is actually... 666 is not necessarily a bad thing. And this is a bad version of it, because you should have the sixes go here, and then there has to be a tail outward so that you can show that actually the power comes from an outward source, goes into a center source, and that these three are all in equal values against each other so that they are able to power and apply energy to a central source. Which is why you might call 666 the beast, because the beast was supposed to be actually the name of a pharaoh, and the pharaoh obviously had centralized power, and it was equilateral to the point that he didn't have any power or any issues having the power be centralized and focused in that one place. But what's important, though I don't know many of these occult symbols, and here is another 666, but again, you need to have it so... I mean, this is kind of right because it shows that the center or the nexus point of power is right here. And you could say, I guess, in theory, that this is an inversion of this. I don't see many other inversions. The Tree of Life inverted is an occult symbol. This isn't the Tree of Life inverted, though. I believe it's just the Tree of Life, isn't it? So, when we talk about the occult, first and foremost, we must reference the fact that occult symbolism is nothing more than the symbolism of a normal and functional religion inverted. And what the inversion does is it takes that symbol and it literally inverts whatever the meaning that was originally ascribed to it. So if peace and prosperity and love is what was normally ascribed to a swastika, through the inversion of it you have war, what's the opposite of prosperity? Regression and hate. And that's what they were trying to occultically bring into reality. That was what their intent was, to occultically bring that form into reality. So, I will say that occultism is just that alone. It's just the inversion, and then the use of that inversion in order to gain power. What's strange is that things like the SS, they didn't invert that. They didn't invert, or are they inverted lightning bolts? Because that's what those are. Those are the lightning bolts of Zeus. So did they actually invert lightning bolts, or is it actually, that's the lightning bolt. I don't think the lightning bolt would go the opposite way. So they didn't invert that, which was kind of a strange thing. So maybe, they weren't even following their own intents. And that's a problem, especially when it comes to occultism, because what you're doing is you're taking something and you are reversing the intent. And so if you, put on your shoulder 2 signs of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, which is the SS symbol, right? you are actually going to eventually, if you are the occult and trying to create something that is outside of that realm, you are going to be your own downfall, because you've put on yourself the insignia that you are actually against the occultism. It's very strange, and so they should have made it, a reversed SS, at the very least. But see, they didn't. What they were trying to do was kind of play both sides. They were trying to gain as much power as they could from old mythical symbols, while at the same time trying to invert and use occult symbols to do things completely in a separate sense, just like they were trying to put Hitler's image in all of the schools, so just like they would with the Jesus image. It's all occultism and an intent to create the savior being, and it's just, it doesn't, occultism doesn't work because it's not an ethos unto itself. It is only an ethos onto something else. And when something else decides to enact power over its inversion, it is always much more powerful, because it is the original. It's like the argument between God and Satan, where Satan said to God, well, I created myself, and God said, well, how did you do it? The problem is that the original source can tell you how you do it. The secondary source is an inversion of the original source, so it doesn't actually maybe even exist in reality. And that's why God could say to Satan, well, how did you create yourself? Because I know you don't even exist. I'm talking to my own mindscape, as it were, if we were to get into heavy philosophy about, what God, is. But, we also talk about the idea that without Satan, you couldn't have heaven or God or anything, because there would not be that inverted quantity. That quantity which is opposite of, therefore making it so the original quantity is something instead of nothing. Very difficult speech, I understand. Very difficult to follow. Sigil to Help Be Assertive by Wolf Antimony. Wolf of Antimony. That's sigil magic, I think, is probably one of the most false and fake magics of all time. It's as unreal and is not. People think that they are karmically balancing themselves with sigil magic, and that is absolutely not the case. For you must say in very clear terms what it is that you are doing, and the person must be able to understand it, or else the magic does not work. But they still do it, and they do it actually because of, I think, that inversion principle I was talking about earlier. They are using symbols which are against their own philosophies and ideals. If they were true Satanists or true individual thinkers without intent on anything outside of them, they would go to pure Gnosticism, and not what I think that they're doing now. So, when we're talking about Gnosticism real quickly, why don't we move over to it? So, Gnosticism is a collection of religious ideas and systems which originated in the 1st century AD among early Christians and Jewish sects. That's not necessarily true. The Gnostic texts may be much, much earlier than that. These various groups emphasize personal spiritual knowledge over the orthodox teachings, traditions, and authority of the church. Now, what's interesting is when we go to images, you can see that there is the image of piercing the veil. And that was also shown here in the occultism somewhere. I know that they had, here it is, the piercing of the veil. But you're not going to truly pierce the veil with occultism because of that inversion principle I was just talking about. You aren't the actual original. So you can't ever pierce the veil, because when you do, you won't be seeing an actual image. So, as for Gnosticism, this is an interesting thing, because it appears to have the tree of life, but it doesn't. It's a very, very interesting, huh? Weiss Blut Rasner Roth. Oh, is this telling us the different current living lines? You know what this looks a lot like? This looks an awful lot like the theology that D&D uses. You know, this being the spiritual high ground, this being spiritual low ground, this being chaos, and this being order. I don't know if that's what's actually happening. Oh no, it looks like chaos is on this side. Huh, only word I can actually see here. Harpocrates Dominus Providebit. Okay, so Gnosticism, for what it's worth, is obviously a very, very interesting religion. And it's very old, and it's based on the ideal that you can, through your own sense of self and understanding, you can define and determine all of the mystical truths that may exist out in the world of man and nature. That you are the spark, you are the essence, and through that you are able to, generate the teachings almost. So, I mean, let's just go look up some things. Gnostics consider the principal element of salvation to be direct knowledge of the supreme divinity in the form of mystical or esoteric insight. Many Gnostic texts deal not in concepts of sin and repentance, but with illusion and enlightenment. Very different version of the world, and that different version of the world creates a different type of reality that people must live under. Interesting. They're talking about how they think Gnostic texts were, influenced by Hellenistic Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Platonism, Plato that is, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Yeah, I feel like maybe they, everything might have been working in tandem. It may not be that these are older ideals. Okay, so let's see here. We've got a good, description also that the Gnostics kind of believe almost that the opposite of what the Bible says, and that, God was the evil thing and that the serpent was trying to teach us good almost. It's an interesting reading, and it's not necessarily a wrong reading depending on your perspective. So, these various groups emphasize personal spiritual knowledge and authority over the church, viewing material existence as flawed or evil. But Gnostic cosmogony generally presents a distinction between a supreme hidden God and a malevolent lesser divinity, sometimes associated with the Yahweh of the Old Testament, who is responsible for creating the material universe. Gnostics consider the principal element of salvation. Yeah. Okay, so they also almost don't believe that the universe is actually a real thing. Like, we're not in something real. It kind of speaks almost to the simulation, but almost something different. Almost experiential, natures and living, under those forms. But they also, there are texts that basically are saying, the God Yahweh that, was responsible for us falling from, the Garden of Eden was actually an evil God, and he was doing things against us, and that there is a supreme God above, all of these other gods, but not the ones that we've seen. We've always only seen, the ones trying to affect us in negative ways. Gnostics find flourished among Christian groups, Mediterranean, blah, blah, blah. And, it's in the Mediterranean that they found the Gnostic texts as well, I believe. Efforts to destroy these texts proved largely successful, resulting in the survival of very little writings by Gnostic theologians. Nonetheless, early Gnostic teachers such as Valentus saw their beliefs as aligned with Christianity, In the Gnostic Christian tradition, Christ is seen as a divine being which has taken human form in order to lead humanity back to the light. However, Gnosticism is not a single standardized system. An emphasis on direct experience allows for a wide variety of teachings. And that is kind of what I was talking about earlier, that basically Gnosticism says that you can understand the sense of the world and reality from your own mind and from your own attempts to delineate what it is that is occurring within time and space. It doesn't say that necessarily you need to hear from a higher divinity or a higher power that's going to be telling you to write down on these golden tablets, the exact Book of Mormon or something. That's not what it's saying. It's saying more that you can look within yourself and find the answer. All right. But all of their texts were very much destroyed, almost completely. And it's a shame because it was some of the most esoteric and interesting thoughts on human existence that we've almost ever had. Origins of Gnosticism are disputed. As for what Gnosticism is, I think I've given you a very brief overview. This is interesting. We'll read this real quick. Gnostic systems postulated dualism between God and the world, varying from the radical dualist systems of Manichaeism to the mitigated dualism of classic Gnostic movements. Radical dualism, or absolute dualism, posits two co-equal divine forces, while in mitigated dualism, one of the two principles is in some way inferior to the other. In qualified monoism, the second entity may be divine or semi-divine. Valentinian Gnosticism is a form of monoism, expressed in terms previously used in dualistic matter. Okay, so this is basically saying the same thing I was saying about the idea of God and the devil speaking and the devil not understanding God when God says, well, how did you create yourself if, how do you exist? How did you come to exist if you don't know how you came to exist? How did you, and that's kind of speaking to the idea of maybe radical dualism, which is, or I guess mitigated dualism. Which one is it? Radical dualism or posits two? Yeah, so it's mitigated dualism, which is basically God is slightly higher than Satan, and that is why he knows. And that's again talking to the ideal of the occult and the inversion principle I was saying. That basically, no matter what you do when you are the occultic form, when the inverse form, which is the true form, wishes to take control, you will have no ability to control it because it dualistically is superior to you. And only through manipulation and control can you, maybe hope to make that superior being imagine itself as being equal or inferior to you. And, obviously such a thing couldn't occur in the ideal of a divine force that is superior to whatever it is that it is talking to, which is inferior. Now, having said that, we go back to the idea of Satan and God talking, and, obviously, God had the superior advantage of knowing that he was eternal, whereas Satan apparently did not understand that ideal, which maybe does make Satan a composite of what you would call the God structure, which basically is monoism, again, which what they're describing, which is that there is only one of them. It's like a man talking to himself in his head, but, at the same time, that thought is occurring, and so there is that separate beast or something. I don't know. It's very difficult to describe everything under the sun. So nihilism. Nihilism is a philosophy of a family of views within philosophy expressing some form of negation towards life or towards fundamental concepts such as knowledge, existence, and the meaning of life. Different nihilist positions hold variously that human values are baseless, that life is meaningless, that knowledge is impossible, or that some set of entities does not exist. So what nihilism is basically the opposite of everything that we've discussed previously. It is the idea that there is nothing that can be understood or gained. There is no point. There is no purpose. If you brush your teeth and you don't get cavities, it is because of who gives a shit. It's just happens that way. Maybe it's for no reason. Maybe it's for a reason. It doesn't matter. If you are, a terrible, evil person, it doesn't matter because none of it matters. It's all just nihilistic nothingness. There's no point to any of it. That is what nihilism is. Nihilism doesn't have good or evil. It doesn't have yes or no. It doesn't have anything because nothing is important. Nothing is of value. Nothing is of significance. It is literally the idea of nothing. It's the idea that these moments are conscious, our abilities to understand them are all of no value and are pointless. And, for what it's worth, it's got as much, going for it as every single other religion, it seems like. But it is a religious principle in the fact that, on a ritualistic basis, at least within your own mind, you're saying that everything is meaningless. And that applies a level of meaning to it, which is, in my mind, a religious context. So even nihilism could be said to be a religion. And so let's go back real quick to religion and say, is there no scholarly consensus over what precisely constitutes a religion? And I would say, I think there is. I think it's ritual. And even if that ritual is as simple as the ritual of you saying to yourself that nothing is important in a nihilistic sense, then you are still holding a ritualistic form within your mind's eye, and you are religious, even if your religion is a religion of nothing. Now, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I think that was a pretty good synopsis of what I believe, religion is in a general sense. Now, obviously, it's a very general sense. We didn't go into, the origins. We didn't go into some of the major problems with. We maybe skimmed the surface. And we talked a little bit about some of the interactions between some of the religions, and we didn't even talk about all religions. We didn't talk about Taoism. We didn't talk about, even though, interestingly enough, we got into some ideas of duality. And Taoism would probably fight those ideals that those two beings should be in a state of unmitigated equality, and that those two divinities should be equal, like a yin and yang. But whether or not that's true, or whether or not monoism is true, is, a matter for endless philosophical discussion. So, thanks everybody for watching. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.